Welcome back to our channel. Have you ever considered how a single secret held by one person can possess the power of an earthquake? Not the kind that shakes the ground, but the kind that shatters illusions, brings down empires, and forces an entire generation to look at something they'd rather ignore. It's a terrifying and fascinating thought that a life built on a lie, even a lie of survival, could become a fault line running directly beneath $1 billion industry. Most stories of fame are about a slow climb, a lucky break, or a carefully managed career. But this is not one of those stories. This is a story about a girl who vanished into a world of shadows, only to re-emerge as its most notorious star, and then its accidental executioner. It's a story that begins with a desperate act of reinvention and ends with one of the most remarkable second acts in Hollywood history. This is the story of a girl who had to destroy her past to build a future. A girl once known as Nora Kuzma, but who the world would come to know and never forget as Traci Lords. To truly understand the explosion that was to come, you have to transport yourself back to the mid-1980s. It was a strange and contradictory time in America. On the surface, it was the era of Reagan's Morning in America, a wave of social conservatism, family values, and patriotic pride. The moral majority held significant political sway, and there was a palpable cultural anxiety about anything that challenged traditional norms. This was the decade of the Satanic Panic, a time when parental advisory stickers started appearing on music albums, and a deep-seated fear of corruption seemed to permeate the suburbs. But beneath that polished surface, a different reality was thriving. The sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s hadn't just disappeared, it had gone underground, morphing and adapting to new technology. The single biggest catalyst for this was the video cassette recorder, the VCR. Suddenly, the adult film industry, once confined to seedy back alley theaters, had a direct pipeline into the American home. The golden age of porn was giving way to the VHS boom, a period of explosive, unregulated growth. This industry was a wild frontier. It was part showbiz, part outlaw culture, operating in a legal and ethical gray zone. It was an insular world with its own stars, its own rules, and its own dangerous secrets. And one of its most poorly kept secrets was its shockingly lax approach to due diligence. In the frantic rush to produce content for an insatiable home video market, corners were cut. Paperwork was often forged, identities were fluid, and the all-important question of age was sometimes met with a wink and a nod. It was a system built on plausible deniability, a house of cards waiting for a strong enough gust of wind to blow it all down. And into this volatile, high-stakes world, a deeply troubled, fiercely ambitious teenager from California was about to walk, carrying a secret that would become that gust of wind. Her story doesn't begin under the neon lights of Hollywood, but in the industrial town of Steubenville, Ohio. Born Nora Kuzma in 1968, her childhood was far from the idyllic American dream. Her parents, Patricia and Louis, were caught in a turbulent, volatile marriage. By her own account, it was a home defined by conflict and emotional neglect. She described her mother as young and overwhelmed, and her father as a tough, often distant figure. From a young age, Nora felt like an outsider in her own life, a restless soul yearning for escape and, more than anything, for control over her own destiny. When she was a young teen, the family moved to Redondo Beach, California. But the change of scenery didn't mend the fractures at home. Her parents' eventual separation left Nora feeling even more adrift. She was a rebellious teenager, skipping school, experimenting, pushing boundaries. But this wasn't just aimless rebellion. It was a desperate search for an identity, for a way out of the powerlessness she felt. She was a keen observer, and she saw how beauty and sexuality could be forms of currency, of power. The turning point came at 15. Armed with a fierce determination to leave her chaotic home life behind, she undertook an act of audacious self-creation. She got her hands on a copy of her deceased half-sister's birth certificate and, through a series of steps, managed to obtain a driver's license and other documents that legally established her as an adult. She wasn't just running away from Nora Kuzma, she was erasing her. In her place, a new persona was born, Tracy Lords, a name she concocted inspired by a character from a school play and a close friend. She was now, on paper, 19 years old. With this new identity as her armor, she set her sights on modeling. She posed for magazines like Penthouse, quickly realizing that her fresh-faced girl-next-door look was a marketable commodity. It wasn't long before the adult film industry, always scouting for new talent, came calling. In the summer of 1984, still legally a minor, but presenting herself as a confident adult, Traci Lords shot her first adult film. Her rise wasn't just fast, it was meteoric. Over the next 2 years, she became one of the industry's biggest stars. Her appeal was her perceived contradiction. She looked innocent, but projected an assertive, almost defiant persona on screen. She was different from the seasoned performers of the era, and audiences responded. She made dozens of films, her face adorning the covers of countless VHS boxes in video stores across the country. She was in demand, making good money, and for a fleeting moment it must have felt like she had finally achieved the control and independence she had so desperately craved. But the entire edifice of her new life was built on that single, foundational lie. And time was running out. The catalyst for the collapse was, ironically, her own 18th birthday. In July 1986, Traci Lords turned 18 in the eyes of the law. For the first time in her career, she was a legal adult. To celebrate, she threw a party, feeling a sense of relief, a sense that the charade was finally over. She could now be herself, or at least a version of herself that wasn't predicated on a felony. Shortly after, an anonymous tip, the source of which is still debated, reached the authorities. The FBI, which was already engaged in a broad crackdown on the industry known as Operation Pornex, began to investigate. The truth unraveled with shocking speed. When investigators confirmed that Traci Lords had indeed worked for 2 years as a minor, the industry went into a state of panic. It was the doomsday scenario they had all tacitly ignored. Every film she had appeared in before her 18th birthday was now classified as child pornography. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a legal and financial apocalypse for the adult film world. FBI agents raided production houses, seizing master tapes and financial records. Dozens of producers, directors, and distributors were hit with federal charges, including pandering and conspiracy to distribute child pornography. The cost of recalling and destroying millions of dollars worth of videotapes was astronomical. Major distributors, once titans of the industry, were driven into bankruptcy. The case created a legal quagmire. A film that was legal one day became contraband the next, simply because the truth about one performer's age had been revealed. The entire industry, which had operated for years with a cavalier disregard for the rules, was now being held to account in the most public and humiliating way possible. Traci Lords, the teenage girl who just wanted to escape her life, had inadvertently become the woman who brought an entire industry to its knees. Imagine for a moment being at the center of that firestorm. At 18 years old, Traci Lords was not just dealing with the trauma of her past, but she was now one of the most infamous people in America. Her face was everywhere, her name a byword for scandal. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for her to disappear, to change her name again and retreat into obscurity, forever defined by those 2 notorious years. But she did something extraordinary. She refused to be a victim. She refused to be erased. This is the part of the story that is so often overlooked. The sheer force of will it took to build a second act from the ashes of a life that had been so publicly immolated. In her 2003 autobiography, Tracy Lords, Underneath It All, she provides a raw, unflinching look into her mindset during this period. It's a work of startling honesty that is crucial to understanding her journey. She wrote, and I quote, "I was both a victim and a participant. How can you be both? It's a question I've struggled with my entire life." This quote is the key to her entire psychology. She doesn't absolve herself of her own choices, the ambition, the creation of a false identity, but she also refuses to carry the blame for the adults who exploited her. It is in this complex gray area that she began the painstaking process of rebuilding her life. Her first step was to confront her past head-on. She cooperated with the FBI investigation, a move that alienated her from the very industry that had made her famous. She began extensive therapy to unpack the years of trauma, not just from her time in the industry, but from her childhood. She struggled with the addictions that had been a coping mechanism. It was a period of intense, painful self-reflection. And then she decided to do the unthinkable. She decided to become a legitimate actress. Hollywood is notoriously unforgiving. It's a town that loves a comeback story, but it has a long memory for scandal, especially of a sexual nature. The doors were not exactly swinging open for Traci Lords. She was typecast, dismissed, and underestimated at every turn. Yet she persevered. She took acting classes, worked on her craft, and started auditioning for anything she could get. Her breakthrough came from the most unlikely of places, the gloriously subversive world of cult filmmaker John Waters. In 1990, he cast her in Cry Baby alongside Johnny Depp. Waters, a director who celebrated outsiders and misfits, saw beyond the scandal. He saw a performer with grit and a unique screen presence. Her role as the tough rockabilly Wanda Woodward wasn't just a part, it was a statement. It allowed her to play a character who was strong and defiant, mirroring her own journey. The film became a cult classic, and for the first time, audiences saw Traci Lords as an actress, not just a headline. It was a critical, transformative moment. Cry Baby was the crack in the wall she needed. The 1990s saw her work tirelessly to build a legitimate, diverse career. She appeared in the hit TV series Melrose Place, a show that was at the epicenter of pop culture. She worked with visionary director David Lynch on the television series Twin Peaks. She had a recurring role on the NBC drama Profiler and famously played the vampire villainess Raquel in the opening scene of the 1998 Marvel blockbuster Blade. Each role was another brick in the new foundation she was building for herself. She even launched a successful music career in the mid-90s with her techno album 1000 Fires, producing a hit single, Control, a song whose title felt deeply, personally significant. She was taking control of her narrative, her art, and her life, one project at a time. This journey was fraught with personal challenges. In interviews, she has spoken about the difficulty of dating, of forming relationships, of trusting people in a world that saw her as a caricature. She spoke of the emotional weight of her past, of how it would surface at unexpected moments. One little known but poignant detail is how, for years, she struggled with the simple act of being photographed, the click of a camera triggering deep-seated anxieties from her past. It's a small, humanizing detail that reveals the profound, lingering impact of her early experiences. The public saw the successful actress. They didn't see the private battles being waged every single day. Of course, a story this complex is not without its controversies and historical debates. For years, the narrative surrounding Traci Lords was fiercely contested. The central debate revolved around that difficult question from her own memoir. Was she a victim or a participant? From a legal and ethical standpoint, the answer is clear. As a minor, she was incapable of giving legal consent. She was a child who was exploited by a system of adults who were legally and morally obligated to protect her, and failed. The hundreds of people who were prosecuted in the wake of the scandal are a testament to that fact. However, in the court of public opinion and within the industry itself, a different, more damaging narrative was often pushed. Some producers and performers from that era attempted to portray her as a cunning, manipulative figure who knew exactly what she was doing and deceived them all. This was, in essence, a strategy of blame shifting, an attempt to mitigate their own culpability by painting the child they exploited as the true perpetrator. The media of the time often played into this, with sensationalist coverage that focused on the salacious details rather than the underlying issues of child exploitation. This debate highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of trauma and survival. A young person in a desperate situation can be simultaneously resourceful, ambitious, and a victim. Agency and victimhood are not mutually exclusive. Her decision to create a fake identity was an act of agency born of desperation. Her ambition was a survival mechanism. To deny the power imbalance and the exploitation at the heart of her story is to ignore the fundamental responsibilities that a society has towards its children. It took decades for a more nuanced understanding to become mainstream. Today we have a much better vocabulary to discuss issues of consent, grooming, and the complex trauma that results from such experiences. Her story, seen through a modern lens, is no longer a simple scandal. It's a powerful and disturbing case study in systemic failure. The consequences of the Traci Lords scandal were immediate, but its historical significance continues to ripple outward to this day. It was, without question, a watershed moment that permanently altered the landscape of the American adult entertainment industry. The most direct consequence was legal. The scandal led to a massive strengthening of the federal record-keeping laws known as Section 2257. After her case, the casual, trust-based system of the past was obliterated. Production companies were now required to maintain meticulous, verifiable proof of age for every single performer, with severe penalties for non-compliance. They had to keep copies of photo IDs and signed declarations, and these records were subject to federal inspection. The Traci Lords Law, as it became unofficially known, professionalized and, in a sense, corporatized the industry, forcing it to adopt the kind of legal standards it had long resisted. The freewheeling outlaw golden age was over for good. Culturally, her story left an indelible mark. She became a symbol, though what she symbolized depended on your perspective. To some, she was a cautionary tale about the dangers of Hollywood and the loss of innocence. To others, particularly in the years that followed, she became a cult icon of survival. She was the woman who went through hell and came back, not broken, but stronger. Her journey resonated with people who felt like outsiders, people who had their own pasts to overcome. She represented the defiant spirit of reinvention, the refusal to be shamed into silence. Her story forces us to ask difficult questions that remain profoundly relevant in the internet age. In an era of social media, OnlyFans, and the widespread availability of explicit content online, The issues of age verification, consent, and the potential for exploitation are more critical than ever. Her case stands as a stark historical reminder of what happens when these things are not taken seriously, when profit is prioritized over protection. She is a living link to a past that the digital world would do well to remember, proving that the lessons from the analog age of VHS tapes are anything but obsolete. In the end, what is the true takeaway from the life of Traci Lords? It's a story that defies easy categorization. It's too messy, too human for a simple moral. It's a story of a broken home, of a desperate escape, of exploitation, and of scandal. But if that's where the story ended, we wouldn't still be talking about it today. The real heart of her legacy lies in everything that happened after. It lies in the quiet dignity of her fight to reclaim her own name and her own life. It's in the courage it took to walk onto a film set knowing what the world thought of her and to prove them all wrong. Her story is the ultimate testament to the human capacity for transformation. It shows us that your beginning does not have to be your end, and that the chapter of your life that caused you the most pain does not have to be the one that defines you. Nora Kuzma created Traci Lords to survive, but ultimately Traci Lords had to reclaim Nora Kuzma to truly live. She took a past that could have destroyed her and forged it into a source of strength, building a future on her own terms, and in doing so, she left us with more than just a shocking headline. She left us with a powerful, enduring, and deeply human story of resilience. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.